Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of here at the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network. And we have fantasy football with Ryan Skolrud. And Ryan, how was your weekend?
A little busy. Had some family things we took care of, but it was a lot of fun to be able to sit and watch some football. Officially start the Christmas season. I'm one of those that Christmas season does not start until after Thanksgiving dinner is over. So there is no Christmas music or anything that plays in our house. But once Thanksgiving is over, we go Christmas crazy. But not until then. So, it was a lot of fun this week. So.
My wife, other than falling in love with me, seems to have fallen in love with the Hallmark station, so she can listen to all her Christmas music when we're on the road, traveling from Jacksonville all the way down to Deerfield Beach. So when I decided to let her close out the last hour and a half of the drive, she knew exactly where to tune in. So, well, let's see what's up in our stockings for what the waiver wires are all about. Who are you picking up?
Well, this week there's a few people that we can deal with in terms of the waiver wire. For the most part, when we go over waiver wire, especially on my podcast, it's more it's players that are owned in 50% of leagues or less. So these are guys that are going to be widely available in 12-team and under leagues. So to start it off at quarterback, I think obviously the number one quarterback to look at for me is Ryan Tannehill. He's played very, very well over the last 6 weeks since he became the starter. I believe he's 5-1 now as the starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. Going into this last week, into yesterday, he had only had one game of under 19 points in fantasy, and that's for leagues that I want to say it's 4 points per passing touchdown and minus 1 point per interception. Only one game under 19 points. In that game, he happened to have 18.96 points. So he has been extremely consistent. And this last week was a little bit of a down week. He finished with 14. That was more of a product of the fact that Derrick Henry was running the ball so well, they just rode Derrick Henry the entire game. And at halftime, I want to say that Tannehill only had, 14 or 15 attempts. So if you're looking for someone who, maybe you're dealing with injuries or you're dealing with guys that have extremely underperformed, I think you have a solid baseline with Ryan Tannehill simply because he's not turning the ball over. He's playing very well. And coming up this next week, looking at the schedule, I want to say that let me pull up where the Titans are playing real quick. The Titans are playing against the Raiders, and the Raiders, as we have seen over and over and over again, have almost no defense whatsoever. So Ryan Tannehill, at least for the first week of the fantasy playoffs, should be a really solid start for you if you're really in need of a quarterback. Moving on, Darius Dice finally showed what everyone was expecting of him when he came out of the draft in 2018. He really showed the explosion. I want to say he had 12 carries for over 100 yards, had a touchdown. He's showing the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and run with it well. So he has shown what everyone expected of him. It looks like he is finally completely healthy after the ACL, the MCL, all the injuries that he's dealt with his knees. We'll see how long he stays healthy. But for right now, he is owned, I want to say, right at 50% of leagues. So he's definitely a guy that you would want. One of the few that's available in that many leagues. Where he could provide you a solid backup or flex play in the fantasy playoffs. For the most part, he has a somewhat kind schedule coming down the way. So the next guy up is AJ Brown. This somewhat has to do with the matchup coming up this next week. The fact that AJ Brown is going up against the Raiders, and overall he has been the top target in terms of targets for Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill's been looking his way a lot, whether it's crossing routes over the middle, deep balls, just overall in general, he's been looking AJ Brown's way. Now AJ Brown has been somewhat inconsistent in terms of his production. But I do believe that he's near the top in the top 5 rookie wide receivers for receiving yards so far this year. And so he's really been, for the most part, a solid contributor. And so I think that, especially in dynasty leagues, he's a guy that needs to be owned and utilized and held on to. But as far as season long, I think that he could provide a solid spark this next week if you're desperate for some wide receiver help. Again, he's going up against the Raiders this next week. So another wide receiver to look at is James Washington of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He really benefited, I think, from Mason Rudolph, which sounds weird because Washington and Rudolph were teammates at Oklahoma State. It seems that Washington may have benefited from Rudolph no longer being the starting quarterback, because when the couple times that Devlin Hodges has been in, he's been looking Washington's way. And so coming up this next week, the Steelers are playing against the Cardinals, who are just absolutely got blown out by the Rams yesterday. And the Rams have been horrible on offense. And so I think that this could be a very good game for James Washington, as well as I'll jump ahead a little bit in terms of the tight ends for Vance McDonald. The Cardinals are so bad against tight ends that Tyler Higbee, the backup tight end for the Rams, was the number 1 scoring tight end in fantasy last week. A few weeks ago, it was Ross Dwelley was the top 3 scoring tight end for the in fantasy going against the Cardinals. So backup tight ends are absolutely killing the Cardinals because they cannot guard tight ends. So I think that Vance McDonald would be a solid pickup. Getting back to another wide receiver, Russell Gage has done very well over the last couple of weeks, especially since Austin Hooper has been knocked out and has not been able to come back in, has not been able to play with dealing with the MCL strain. Then you had this last week that Julio Jones was not healthy with his AC sprain in his shoulder. So with him not able to go, it basically put everything on Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, and Gage still finished with a touchdown. So he's had 10-plus points the last 2 weeks. So he's definitely a guy that you can look at, especially if Julio has to miss more time. The last guy I wanted to put on here in terms of picking up for Waiver Wire is going to be Jason Witten. Well, he's been back and forth. He does every once in a while provide a big spark. And this last week, again, not one of the top tight ends in fantasy. You don't expect that every week out of him. Again, his age, all the other weapons that are being utilized in the Cowboys offense. But he is definitely a guy I think that could be a solid, could provide a spark based on matchup over these next couple weeks in the fantasy playoffs.
Okay. All right, let's talk about some backup quarterbacks that are providing spark.
Well, it was good to see Drew Lock getting his first start. I actually had a couple leagues where I sat. I want to say in all 3 leagues, I sat Cortland Sutton because of the fact that Drew Lock was playing against a Chargers defense that has played very well against wide receivers. And in 2 of those 3 leagues, I may end up losing because of not starting Cortland Sutton, who finished with 2 touchdowns, and seemed to have a decent chemistry with Drew Lock. So, provided the win also for the Broncos over the Chargers. And so we'll see how long this lasts. It's a good first game. We'll see, what he can continue to do. But as long as Drew Lock is at quarterback, I think Cortland Sutton's fantasy value remains. I think that's one of the things to look at, is that you don't necessarily have to look at downgrading Cortland Sutton because of his quarterback situation, at least not for right now. Another one was David Blau, with how he performed in the Thursday football game against the Bears. Definitely no one expected that, especially on his first pass. I want to say it was his first pass, was a 75-yard touchdown, I believe, to Kenny Golladay. Really threw Galladay's way a lot. I was not expecting that. He did also throw to T.J. Hawkinson a ton. I want to say that Hawkinson had 11 targets or so, but only 6 catches for about 13 yards. Now Hawkinson is on IR, so I think that just means that Kenny Golladay is going to keep his value with David Blau there. He's going to look for him and target him in the passing game. And then Devlin Hedges, I kind of mentioned earlier, while he doesn't throw the ball a lot, and doesn't have a cannon of an arm, I think that guys like James Washington keep their value. Vance McDonald, especially this next week with the matchup against the Cardinals, I think keeps his value. May even have a little bit better value simply because of who he's playing. So it was nice to see that these three quarterbacks stepping up into starting positions played very, very well and did not, for the most part, did not hurt the fantasy value of the players around them.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk about Minshew Mania being back in Jacksonville. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Minshew Mania back in Jacksonville, I actually, this last week, started DJ Chark in a couple leagues, and it wasn't until Minshew actually came in that Chark finally started to do something. So as far as fantasy value all around, I think that DJ Chark's value goes back up a little bit now now that we know that Minshew is going to be continuing to be the quarterback. D.D. Westbrook's value, I think, goes up a little bit because of this move. Westbrook got a lot of targets in this last game, performed very well, and so the amount of times that Minshew was looking his way, I think, is definitely a plus. Westbrook has had a kind of a really an up and down season. A lot of people were expecting a lot out of him. In the preseason was one of those fantasy sleeper darlings that really just didn't produce. And part of that was because he seemed to have a really good chemistry with Nick Foles. And then when Nick Foles went down week 1, it went to Gardner Minshew, and Gardner Minshew basically, for the most part, mostly looked DJ Chark's way. Now we are seeing, at least in this last game, when Minshew came back in after Foles was benched, he is looking D.D. Westbrook's way a lot, and is providing value there. So Westbrook is definitely a guy that, if he's available, is someone to look at as another possible, late pickup in order to create some depth on your fantasy rosters for the fantasy football playoffs. So it's definitely interesting to see that. And we'll see what kind of an effect it has on Fournette. Fournette's been back and forth all season. One of the interesting notes that I saw posted on Twitter earlier today was that through 13 weeks, Leonard Fournette has not been injured yet and is on pace to finish with 87 receptions. Now, for a guy that's been injured every year that he's been in the league and has never really been known as a receptions guy, I think obviously this Minshew being around is going to elevate his fantasy value again a little bit because of his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield that they've started to show. So it's definitely interesting to see what he can do, and his value should stay up with Minshew now in the fold again as the quarterback of the Jaguars.
Yeah, it became inevitable that as we watched the game, with the types of mistakes that Nick Foles was making, think about it. He had one intentional grounding, 3 sacks, and he also had 1 interception. You can't have 5 miscues in the first quarter, especially knowing the team's been beaten handily. No way.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah, it was not a pretty sight from Foles. Just some of the mistakes that he was making. They didn't seem characteristic of say the times when he's come in as a backup, and where you can almost it almost feels like with Nick Foles. We talked about this in the pre-show, where Foles has always been a guy that's been more prepared as a backup quarterback when it's not all the pressure on him. You think his very first real breakout year was when he was with the Philadelphia Eagles, and just had an absolutely ridiculous touchdown to interception ratio. But he wasn't the starter that year.
Right.
He came in later and became the starter due because of injury. And so, he had a great year. And then the next year,